More murders at Whitechapel, strange and horrible. The newspapers reek with blood, wrote Lord Cranbrook in October 1888, capturing the hysteria gripping London. In the autumn of that year, a shadowy killer terrorized the impoverished Whitechapel district, slaying at least 5 women with unprecedented brutality. Each new victim, found in the dead of night with throat slashed and body mutilated, sent waves of panic through the city. The murderer was never identified or caught, but he soon gained a notorious name that would haunt history: Jack the Ripper. Whitechapel in Victorian London was a maze of dark, narrow alleys teeming with poverty and despair. By 1888, this East End district was overcrowded and squalid, home to roughly 80,000 people crammed into rundown tenements. Work was scarce and wages meager. A significant underclass lived hand to mouth, and crime and alcohol abuse were rampant. Life was so grim that over half of children born in the East End died before their 5th birthday. Many women had little choice but to turn to prostitution just to afford a nightly bed in a lodging house. Whitechapel already had a notorious reputation as a dangerous slum, but that summer and autumn, its infamy would reach new heights. Over a span of barely 10 weeks in 1888, 5 women were brutally murdered in Whitechapel. Crimes soon attributed to a single unknown killer. The first was 43-year-old Mary Ann "Polly" Nichols, found on August 31st with her throat slit and abdomen mutilated. A week later, Annie Chapman was found on September 8th, similarly butchered and disemboweled. Then on the night of September 30th came a double event. Elizabeth Stride was killed, likely interrupted before mutilation, and less than an hour later, Catherine Eddowes was discovered with horrific injuries, including the removal of internal organs. Finally, Mary Jane Kelly, only 25, was slain in her lodging room on November 9th. Kelly's body was hideously disfigured, the most savage attack of them all. All the victims were destitute women from the Whitechapel area. In each case, the murderer struck in the dead of night and escaped unseen. Each victim's throat was cut, and most bodies were viciously mutilated post-mortem. In several cases, organs were removed with apparent skill, suggesting the killer had some anatomical knowledge. This distinctive modus operandi convinced police that the 5 murders were the work of the same perpetrator. The press, seizing on the lurid details, gave this phantom a nickname that would endure: Jack the Ripper. Fear turned to outrage as the police struggled to catch the Ripper. Scotland Yard poured resources into the manhunt, more officers on the streets, scores of interviews and interrogations. Yet they found no prime suspect. Early suspicions of a local thug nicknamed Leather Apron led nowhere, and detectives were left grasping at shadows. The case was unprecedented for the Victorian era, and it quickly became a media circus. Numerous letters poured in from people claiming to be the murderer. One, famously addressed "Dear Boss," taunted the police and chillingly coined the name Jack the Ripper. Another missive, the "From Hell" letter, arrived with a half of a human kidney purportedly taken from a victim. Whether these letters were genuine or hoaxes, they inflamed the public's imagination and cemented the Ripper's fearsome legend. Despite all efforts, the authorities could not capture the killer. Investigators even attempted early criminal profiling, theorizing about the murderer's habits and background, but with no forensic science to aid them, fingerprints and DNA testing were decades away. They had little to go on. The Ripper was fiendishly elusive, striking and then disappearing into the maze of Whitechapel. Public criticism of the police reached a boiling point, and the Metropolitan Police Commissioner ultimately resigned in disgrace over his failure to stop the murder. In the end, the trail went cold as abruptly as it had begun. In the aftermath, speculation about Jack the Ripper's identity ran rampant. Over the years, investigators and amateur sleuths have proposed dozens of suspects, some plausible, others far-fetched. Three names in particular have long dominated Ripper discussions. Montague John Druitt, an unstable barrister who reportedly disappeared right after the final murder and was later found drowned in the Thames. His suicide, coinciding with the end of the killings, raised suspicion that he might have been the Ripper. Michael Ostrog, a Russian-born thief and former surgeon with a history of insanity. Ostrog was mentioned in police reports due to his criminal record and medical background, but no hard evidence ever linked him to the murders. Aaron Kosminski, a Polish Jewish immigrant and barber who lived in Whitechapel. Kosminski allegedly had a profound hatred of women and was committed to an asylum a couple of years after the murders. Some at Scotland Yard suspected him at the time, and a 2019 DNA analysis of a victim's shawl, controversial and disputed, later pointed toward Kosminski's family line. Beyond these, theories have implicated all manner of culprits. Suspects ranged from local butchers and doctors to high-ranking society figures. A famous painter, Walter Sickert, and even a royal physician, Sir William Gull, were accused in sensational conspiracy theories. Some have speculated that the killer could have been female, Jill the Ripper. Despite the endless conjecture, no suspect has ever been proven to be Jack the Ripper, and the case remains a tantalizing mystery. There are several reasons Jack the Ripper was never caught. In 1888, detective work was rudimentary. There were no fingerprint databases, no DNA tests, and crime scene preservation was haphazard at best. The killer left behind almost no physical evidence, and the few clues investigators did find, like a bloodied piece of apron or vague descriptions of a suspect, were insufficient to crack the case. The murders also stopped after November 1888, denying the police any further chances to apprehend the culprit. In the years that followed, whatever evidence existed gradually disappeared, and later attempts to apply modern forensic techniques have been hampered by contamination and doubt. Just as important is how the Ripper story morphed into legend. Over decades, the tale has been embellished by folklore, false confessions, and fictional retellings. Separating truth from myth became nearly impossible. Given the lost evidence and the layers of myth-making, most experts concede that the Ripper's identity will likely remain unsolved. Although the killer was never identified, the Ripper saga had lasting effects on London and beyond. The public outcry over the murders drew attention to Whitechapel's awful living conditions and galvanized efforts to reform the slums in the years that followed. Culturally, Jack the Ripper became an infamous icon. He has inspired countless books, films, and theories, and his case marked the beginning of the modern fascination with serial killers in the media. The very name, Jack the Ripper, remains synonymous with terror and mystery. In recent times, there has been a push to remember the victims more than the villain. The five women, Polly Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, are now recognized as real people with stories of their own, not just faceless names in a crime saga. Focusing on their lives and hardships provides a more humane understanding of this tragedy and the Victorian society that allowed it. Ultimately, Jack the Ripper endures as a haunting enigma, a dark chapter of history that may never be fully closed. His brief reign of terror left an indelible mark on London, and the mystery of his identity continues to fascinate and horrify. As the decades pass, the world remains captivated by this unsolved case, a reminder that some mysteries simply refuse to give up their secrets.